hand over to Ruth. Again.
I think perhaps maybe from our prayers and from our reading and from our songs, you might come to the conclusion that this morning we're thinking about God's vision, God's will. What is it God has placed on us? I know many people have told me, and I know Nicola and I spoke about it a long, long time ago, people that say, well, God doesn't place anything on my life. God places something on everybody's life. But we have to be open, as we've just been singing. We have to be open and we have to listen. You know, just recently, I had worship music playing in my bedroom. And a silly thing, I was cleaning my teeth. And I had an electric toothbrush going. And the worship music was loud. I could still hear it over the toothbrush. And yet God spoke to me. And I heard him. And you know, I still keep thinking about that. His voice was so quiet, and yet I heard it over all the noise and all the clutter that was going on in my room. Probably not clutter, but you know what I mean. And thoughts as well going around in my mind. So it is all about knowing our vision and what it is God would have of us. You know, not just for the charity, but other people also. I want to tell you just about a young girl. I think she was probably about 22, and I'd been taken to a church to speak. Well, it was a church, but it was just in a room in Uganda. It was a homestead. It was muddy, it was wet, it was mucky. It was a small room, much, much smaller than our worship today, but it was crammed full of people. And when I walked in, I wanted to take my shoes off because they were so dirty, but they told me to keep them on. On the floor was just like a rough type of lino. Anyway, I spoke, we worshipped, and my mind was constantly drawn to the back of the church, to a corner where there was a young girl. And she was just standing there, she was worshipping, she was joining in with the service. And I couldn't help but wonder why I was drawn to her. So afterwards, I asked the pastor, and the pastor told me that young girl has no family, no one close to her, so she looks after that little room. That room is also her home. It was spotless, although it was filthy outside. The floor was incredible. We only sat on benches. There weren't chairs. And I asked to go and be introduced to her. Do you know what she told me? This is what God would have me do. Sometimes I think about that and I can feel the emotion within me. I could easily have tears. And then the pastor moved me away a little way, and she said, "You see her carry a bag. That is her belongings. That was all she owned, was a carrier bag of, I don't know what it was, personal items, clothing, but it was only a normal carrier bag. And I then went back to speak to this girl, and she said, "It's also my pillow. This bag is also my pillow." And I said, "Well, where's your mattress?" She said, "The floor is my mattress." This is what God wants me to do. Can you imagine that? I felt so humbled, as I'm sure you probably do. When we left, I just left a little bit of money to buy her a mattress because I couldn't imagine just sleeping on the floor, although of course in Uganda that's quite common. So it doesn't matter if we're doing something big or something small, or where we're a prayer warrior. They too are so important for churches, for everyday lives, for an organisation like ours, for other charities working in different countries. You know, verse 5 of what Nicola has just read, and we all know this reading so well, and it is probably a reading we could have beside us every day. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. You know, it's so very, very easy to, when things are going well, to make your own decision. But you know, unless it's God's decision, it's never a good one. When I was quite young, I'm not going to tell you the whole story because it's too long, but I always wanted a black baby. Can you imagine that? Well, obviously I couldn't imagine it. I was too young to understand why I wanted a black baby. At 4, I had to go into hospital, and when I got there, there was a black doll waiting for me on my bed. Is this today? And that satisfied me. At 4, I had a black baby. So I still have that black doll. And it will go on to my daughter one day. That daughter is the epitome of a mother's love. My father was also a churchman. And, you know, we didn't grow up with a lot of money. So I knew for them to go out and buy this lovely black doll was quite a sacrifice. And later, when I was older, my father told me how my mother had sat up all night dressing that doll. So for me, that has had a great impact on my life. But also throughout my life, we've had missionaries come and stay with us. When you heard of missionaries coming home on furlough, you know, when there weren't aeroplanes to whip us over to Uganda or whatever country we want to go to. So they would come and stay with us because at that time we lived in Eastbourne by the sea. So we would have them come and stay. My mother would look after them and give them a good break. But I always remember we had them from Asia and from Africa. And they would tell us about the bush and how it was for people living there. And those things obviously stuck in my mind. But ever since I wanted a black baby, I always kept thinking, I'd love to go to Africa, somewhere where I could do something to help those people. And all my life, I kept thinking that. You know, just now your pastor was talking about having patience. Well, I didn't have too much patience at that time because it was something always at the back of my mind. And although I've always had asthma, and sometimes quite badly, there was often the thought, well, I couldn't really go anyway. But, I'm quite a determined person, and I always hoped, I always talked to God about it, and then he waited until I was 59. At that point, I'd been quite ill, and I'd done so much fundraising and working for organisations all my life. And at 59, I'd now got 2 grandchildren, 2 of my 6, and I was talking to my husband and said, well, let's take early retirement. I tried to get him to, but he definitely wouldn't. And just have time with our family, because none of us know how long we have. Life can be short. Life can be taken very quickly. A friend of mine has just been taken within weeks, and suddenly you realise how vulnerable life is. But at 59, God opened the door for me to go to Uganda. And it was around this time he said north, south, east and west. And so I had an invitation from Uganda to go. And so I went. And I was very well over there. So that put paid to those people that said, oh, you probably shouldn't go. I was there for 3 weeks. And I came back, and when I spoke about it, especially to my husband, he said, let's book you to go back again. And that first year, I went 3 times. And so was it my impatience that God waited till I was 59? Only he knows that answer. I don't know that answer. But certainly I have learnt over the years, we have to listen and we have to worship. And also just before the service, we were talking about not just coming to church to worship. We have to worship him all the time. I love to have worship songs on of an evening, and it draws me into that place of quiet with God. It draws me into his heart and his mind to know what plans he has for the future, how he is going to guide that vision. It is in understanding his vision. It's quite hard, and I know a lot of people say, well, I don't really want to know because I don't know what God is going to do or where he might send me or what he might ask to do. I didn't know what was ahead of me. I had no idea. About 3 years, might have been 4, after Uganda began, I was just talking again to God and said, if you want me to go anywhere else, open doors. And then one day I had an email from somebody in Pakistan. I didn't know who they were, had no idea. Would I go and take the work of Aim for Change? I remember standing at my desk and probably screeching, knowing me, and shouting out, I'm going to Pakistan. And my husband came running in from his office and said, no, you're not. He had already been to Pakistan on business, and I don't think he was too keen on me going. I knew nothing about Pakistan. One of those countries that I hadn't really taken much notice of. I knew there were problems there. But anyway, I went. God had opened a door. I'd asked for that. I couldn't turn around and say, no, Lord. And now you only have to see and hear about the work that's going on in Pakistan to know that God is working in that country, not just through the charity. And at the end, I'll show you a photograph up on the screen, and you will understand I'm not going to tell you any more about it because I don't want to spoil it. But it is just amazing what God is doing in an Islamic country, but the people are accepting. So when we're hoping one day to fulfill God's will, learn my lesson of patience. You know, it's hard being patient. We all know that, just in our walk with God. But having patience is a wonderful thing. And the older I've got, the more patience I've learned. Although Nicola might tell you something different. You know, Nicola's a great support. She always has been. First she was a trustee of the charity, and then she began helping with the work and still does that. And so she's almost like, I'm not going to say my better half, but she's almost like my other half in her support of the work and all that she does. I'm supposed to keep an eye on the time, but I haven't done that. I just want to tell you another, well, it's not a story, it's about another project. And this is about Back of School. It's our latest project. Some of you, of course, know about Back of School and what's been going on there. But you don't know about the very beginning of Pastor Bob. He is the one who has had this vision from the very beginning. But again, he was another impatient one. And in fact, could we almost say he's still impatient? Partly because this work is amazing. Even I'm amazed with it. You know, I might run it, but it is God who provides for it. And God has provided for this school in the most remarkable way. But when I first went, it's now 21 years ago, and I went to a church. It was this church that I very first went to on my first visit, and I first met Bob. A young man with lots of ideas. He was relatively well educated. And what you need to bear in mind on my first visit, we weren't a registered charity. People knew what I was doing, buying cows for a village. And they just wanted to give, to make the people's lives better. And I probably should have told you in the intro that a lot of our work is done through the giving of animals. Not quite so many now, because a lot of money goes towards looking after the orphans. But Pastor Bob, the first thing he said to me, well, he wasn't a pastor then, he was just Bob. First of all, he wanted to go to university. Well, it was just the money I'd been given, the money my husband had donated to the work, and I had to say to him, I'm sorry, you know, we just don't have those sort of funds at the moment. Because although university in Uganda is expensive, it's not so expensive as this country, but it's still a lot of money. And I had to say no, and then the following year he said, would you build me a church so that I could become a pastor? And I remember saying to him, do you think that's what God is really calling you to do? It felt to me, you know, as an organisation, the first white woman to go to that area. And yes, they've got to clasp at straws. And so we were then beginning to build the church, this same church that I'd been taken to. It was a big church, and it was very, very rough and tumbling down. So we did build that church. But, you know, people see that and they want you to do it for them as well. So for Pastor Bob, yes, we helped him in little ways. And the first way we helped him, and you will see a picture of this, we set up a charcoal business. You know, all it is a rough shack. It's small. It's a small place, just enough to hold bags of charcoal and a seat for him to sit in. And we set that up. By this time, he was married. He had a little boy and another one on the way. So at least it gave him an income. The next time we went, sometimes I've gone to Uganda and I haven't told people I'm going. You might think that's a bit sneaky, maybe. But no, when you're giving other people's money to other countries that you probably don't know that well, you need to know that that money is being used wisely. And so I would just turn up, I'd fly over, book myself in. We've always had a brilliant driver. He would come and pick me up, take me to the hotel, and then he'd take me out to these projects. And the first one I went to see was Pastor Bob. There he was, sitting in his little hut with the charcoal and buckets, reading his Bible. He said, while it's quiet, I can sit here and study God's word. And I saw a vast change in him then. So that was lovely. Just went on doing what I was doing in Uganda. And then I didn't see him for a couple of years. The charity was growing and you can't get round to every project. So it was probably a couple of years later when I went to Uganda, and I'm not sure if you were you with me that time? No. And I asked about Pastor Bob, and he had sold his charcoal business. So maybe you can imagine, if you know me, those that know me, I think can imagine my reaction. I wasn't overly pleased because people had given money to help with that charcoal business. But by this time, he was beginning to understand God's vision for his life. Do you know what he did? In selling that, he bought a field, an acre of land, in a very rural area. Very rural. And I was asked to be taken to that place. And when I got there, it was the roughest of land. There were trees, there were shrubs, as you can imagine bushland to be. And he was full of the joys of the Lord and singing and happy and saying, one day, Mama, this place will be a place for worship and a place for children. And I was thinking, whew, this was about probably 5 years, 6 years into my going to Uganda. And even after the first year, I remember my husband saying, I said, look at all we've done in 1 year. He said, wait till 5 years. And I couldn't even begin to imagine 5 years of working in Uganda. But anyway, it was 21 years, and although my husband's in glory now, and has been for some time, I think he still knows the work that is going on because his support was incredible. But anyway, going to see this place, and yes, I could imagine it cleared, I could imagine all sorts of things, but was that was that God's will for us too? Like he said to me when I was walking around Amazing Grace School, and that too was an absolute wreck of a place. But God said, now is the time. I'd walked away, I'd gone with 4 other people, and God actually said, now is the time. And as I went past to Bob's, I knew that if it was God's will, he would provide. And I think it was probably the first time Nicola came with me there. Bob and his wife had made bricks, and they had built a little room. It was small. Nicola would tell you it was small. It was rough, because they'd done it by hand. You know, you can't make a brick and then just build with it. You've got to make it. You've got to put it out in the sun. You've got to cover it in straw. You've got to wait for those bricks to go hard, and then you can start building. They collected all the rubble from this acre of land, and they put it in for the base. And then they began to build. They held little services in there. They held a few children. They had a few very small children that they started teaching in there. So now we have, I've just spoken to Bob yesterday, 500 children in that school. 200 plus are orphans. But those, we care for those. Nicola mentioned them in her prayers. Somebody donated so we could rig them out in the uniforms. We gave them mattresses because they sleep. There is a dormitory. We built a dormitory. We've built all the classrooms that they need. We've put in electricity. We've put in water. I'm sure there's lots I'll forget there, but everything they need, they have. But the parents that can afford to pay have also saved little bits of money. Normally you just sing with drums, and the kids will dance with drums as well. But they saved up for a little, I'm not sure what it is, but they have something they can play music on. And before school, they sing, they worship, they pray. In fact, I've just had a video of that. So it's a wonderful place. And I truly believe Bob's vision will go on and on. It's not going to stop. There is a big piece of land next to where the school is. And just recently, the charity has bought a section of this land. There's now water, there's toilets, and probably a place to wash as well. And now there is a kindergarten block and an office block. That too, that money was donated. Wasn't just lying in the charity, that money was donated. And so, because the kindergarten, as we all know, little children make a lot of noise. And for the senior children studying, sometimes it was too much. So now they've moved them out of the way a little bit. But there's a lot of land, and I can see, whether I should still be around to see it come to fruition, only God knows that. But I can see that now going on to becoming probably a senior school. If the charity can provide, then maybe that's what will happen. I don't know. That's not my vision. That is Bob's vision. But from a guy of such humble beginnings in a charcoal business to sitting there reading his Bible and studying God's word, not just on a Sunday, but every day while he was selling charcoal. He did have gloves, mind you, just in case you're wondering. Charcoal's very dirty, as probably you might know. And so he would take his gloves off and go back to his Bible. And for me, that is the most incredible way of serving God. Starting with such humble beginnings. And now, through Aim for Change, he has been able to provide education in that area for 500 children. And I have no doubt it will get bigger. And maybe that's God's vision as well. It would be a wonderful thing if it is. But that school is highly recommended in the area. They've now been given the okay to take other children in, senior children, so that they can take their exams in that school. And that's quite an accolade, because only certain schools in districts can have children sitting for exams. His children had to go elsewhere. But now they can all come and sit at Backer School and take their exams. They've been given a government licence for that. So I think, for all of us, we have to live each day depending on God, trusting in God, as we have just read, and not leaning on our own understanding. Many years ago, I was asked to speak from here in my home. I was asked to give a Christmas morning message to the people, bearing in mind they were 4 hours ahead of us, and early, very early one Christmas morning, I think it was about 4 o'clock, I had a call. Can I give a message to the people in a church? And I thought, oh my goodness, I've had no preparation, nothing. And so I just said, Lord, please guide me, whatever it is. And I spent some time in quiet in those early hours. And God, he spoke to me and he said, my timely preparation for future eventualities. They are words. They're not from me. They're not from me. They're God's words. So you can think about them too. For, I've spoken to so many people about those words, and they've all said, or many have said, they've taken them back with them and thought about it. Because being impatient is not what God would have us be. I know I was. I know I was when I was younger. I was always wanting to do more and more. And that's why probably it didn't happen till I was 59. My timely preparation for future eventualities. He has a time and a place and a purpose for when he wants things to happen. Amen.